You step into the corridor at dusk. It isn't silent, not really. There's the rustle of linen sandals on marble, the faint clink of gold bangles brushing against stone walls, the distant hum of water from the peristyle fountain, and beneath it all, whispers, faint, feminine, steady, like a ritual. You pause beside a painted wall. The fresco shows Venus rising from the sea, her limbs wrapped in silk that mimics foam. She is serene, untouchable. But behind that plaster, behind the wall itself, real women whisper. Their voices leak through thin partitions, slave girls and their mistress, a domina. You hear the scrape of a bronze comb, the splash of scented oil being poured into a shallow dish. You hear someone giggle, then silence, a sharp command, and then a name, someone not in the room, someone they speak of as if she isn't quite human. It smells like rose oil in this part of the house. Rose, incense, and something metallic. You move closer. Inside a curtained chamber, a domina reclines on a cushioned bench. Her hair is being arranged in elaborate coils by a Syrian slave girl with nimble fingers. Another girl powders her cheeks with crushed white lead. Her skin has begun to yellow at the edges, a slow poison blooming under her beauty. She knows it. She does it anyway. A Roman matron must appear untouched by sun, labour, or pleasure. The artifice must never crack. From behind another veil, laughter rises. Someone is describing tomorrow's beauty rituals. They speak of depilation, of mercury salves, of the spear-shaped instrument that will part a new bride's hair before the ceremony, symbolic violence posing as tradition. No one says what it costs, not out loud. A domina rises. She walks slowly through the corridor, past you, toward the study where her husband, a Roman senator, awaits with his guests. Her steps are elegant, practiced, but she leans slightly on one side. Perhaps her corset is too tight. Perhaps she hasn't eaten. Perhaps the lead in her powder has begun to make her bones ache. She doesn't flinch. She moves through her house like a high priestess moving through a shrine of illusion. Every gesture part of a performance designed to reflect his power, not hers. And this is only the beginning. Before we step further into these buried rituals of sex, suffering, and survival, if you haven't already, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. These aren't just stories. They are warnings. They show us how far people were willing to go, how far we still go, to fit into roles we never chose. And I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. It's strange, isn't it? That across continents and centuries we're drawn together by the echoes of people who died thousands of years ago. Now, let's walk deeper. Because what we call intimacy today, private, gentle, freely chosen, was something else entirely in ancient Rome. It was weaponized. It was monetized. It was dictated by class, law, and bloodline. And it starts here, in these halls, where perfume masks decay and whispers carry secrets that empires were built upon. The mirror is made of polished silver. It distorts her face slightly, but not enough to hide what's happening beneath the surface. A domina sits still as the slave girl applies another layer of face powder. She doesn't blink as the cool paste touches her skin, though she feels the sting, mild now, but growing stronger over time. Her cheeks already ache from the application earlier in the day. The mixture is thick and chalky. It smells faintly of vinegar and something metallic. She knows the recipe well. White lead, crushed finely, blended with vinegar until smooth. Applied daily, reapplied hourly. The poison doesn't kill quickly. That's the trick of it. It begins with headaches, then nausea, then pain in the bones, a stiffness in the joints. The skin starts to discolour. Teeth loosen. Miscarriages multiply. But the face, if done well, glows pale and perfect. It radiates status. Roman men look at a woman like a domina and see not just beauty, but wealth, self-control, and discipline. She's untouchable because she's untouchably composed. And yet, every breath she takes carries particles of her own demise. This is not vanity, this is survival. In elite Roman society, a woman's appearance was never just her own. Her complexion was a canvas that reflected her husband's status. Her painted face was a public statement, a political asset, a weapon sharpened by pain. Cosmetics were everywhere in a patrician woman's daily life, and almost all of them deadly. For rouge, cinnabar, mercury-based, red and vivid, and bitter on the tongue if it slipped to the lips. Applied thickly to cheeks and lips, it stained beautifully, but over years it also invaded the nervous system, caused tremors, madness, even death. For the eyes, antimony, crushed and mixed with honey or wine. It darkened the lashes, outlined the lids, drew focus to the gaze. But it blurred vision, caused chronic infections. Slowly, silently, it blinded. Ovid's Ars Amatoria reads like a handbook of destruction. He writes, "Mix white lead with vinegar, crush cinnabar with rose oil and lard, line the eyes with black from burnt ivory and antimony." A Roman woman didn't simply prepare for her day. She performed a sacrament of suffering, one stroke at a time. In homes across the empire, mirrors reflect not truth but transformation. Mothers teach daughters which powders cover bruises best. Slave girls whisper recipes that kill slowly enough to preserve appearances, and in private, women count the costs, quietly, because complaining is unseemly, even when your hair is falling out in clumps. The lead makes the skin feel tight, like a mask drying. But it's not the mask that's the danger, it's the truth beneath it. That in Rome, survival for women required self-erasure. By the time the symptoms show, it's often too late. Doctors don't speak of it openly. They write letters filled with vague terms, female complaints, hysteria, melancholia. But behind closed doors, they know what the lead does. They've seen it in the lungs of slave girls who grind powder all day, in the bones of noble women who fade slowly, politely, as they fulfill every duty expected of them. They were painted to death, not because they wanted to be beautiful, but because they were never allowed to be anything else. The child stands in front of the mirror. She is 9, maybe 10. Her wedding gown has been fitted in secret over the past week. Layers of saffron-dyed wool, pins shaped like flowers, a belt knotted for fertility. Her arms are still thin, her shoulders still soft with the roundness of childhood. But tonight, she becomes a wife. The household bustles with preparation. Flowers hang over the doorframe. The marriage bed has been made up with embroidered sheets. A matron who has only married once and birthed living sons will walk the child to the threshold, placing her hand in that of her future husband, who waits in the next room with wine on his breath. She's never met him alone before. He's in his 30s. This is not unusual. In Rome, marriage was not a union of love. It was a transaction of lineage, a deal between fathers, sealed with dowries and witnesses, designed to produce legitimate children and bind families together through blood. The girl's feelings were not part of the equation. Her body was. The wedding contract has already been signed, on papyrus, sealed with wax, witnessed by men. The terms are precise. She must submit to her husband's desires no fewer than twice a week, unless prevented by menstruation, illness, or religious observance. She must not deny unusual requests unless they cause her injury. Refusal will result in deductions from her dowry. If she conceives, the child belongs to the father's family. If she fails, blame will fall on her. This is written in ink. It carries the force of law. No one asks if she understands. In the hours before the ceremony, she's prepared like a sacrifice. Her mother and aunts undress her gently, brush her hair, paint her lips with red, line her eyes with kohl. She's told to be brave, told to smile, told to listen carefully when her husband speaks. On the wedding night, the bed is blessed by household gods. The threshold is sprinkled with sacred water. Nuts are scattered to symbolize fertility. Outside the room, the guests feast and drink. Inside, a girl becomes a woman in the eyes of the law, though her mind is still chasing shadows of dolls and games. The next morning, the sheets will be checked, and so begins a marriage rooted not in affection, but in expectation. Her duties include weaving, managing slaves, bearing children, and pleasing her husband. If she dies in childbirth, she will be praised as virtuous. If she fails to conceive, she may be sent away, her dowry reduced, her name forgotten. Sometimes the husbands are kind, sometimes not, but the system doesn't care. Roman society did not require love in its marriages, only obedience. Passion was reserved for courtesans, for affairs, for the theatres and bathhouses. Wives were vessels for lineage, their worth measured in silence, submission and fertility. And so the contract stands, signed, stamped, sealed. She is not a child anymore, not because she grew up, but because Rome said so. The door to the bedchamber looks like any other, but what happens inside will shape the empire. Livia Drusilla sits beside her dressing table, calmly sipping a blend of mint and wine. Outside, Rome pulses with politics, petitions, trials, executions. But here, beneath a silk canopy and among the scent of myrrh, Livia works in silence. Her power isn't in the Senate, it's in the servants' whispers. She knows that the private lives of Rome's elite are not private at all. They are leverage. Every affair, every illness, every craving whispered between bedposts becomes a weapon when passed to the right ears. And Livia listens well. She pays her slave girls to listen too. They bring her names, who sleeps where, who fails to perform, who weeps after, who bruises easily. She keeps notes in her head. Then she waits. Because in Rome, sex is never just sex. It's information, currency, power. A man who dominates in the forum may grovel in the bedroom. A senator who campaigns on virtue may secretly visit boys in disguise. A general may command legions but beg for softness in private. And if that truth becomes public, his enemies will feast on it. Take Julius Caesar. The rumours followed him his entire life, not because of what he did, but what he allowed. As a young man, he spent time at the court of Nicomedes of Bithynia. Years later, his political opponents accused him of being the Queen of Bithynia, not because he loved a man, but because he may have played the passive role. In Rome, domination defined manhood. To be penetrated by man or fate was weakness, humiliation. Whether the story was true didn't matter. The suggestion was enough. Even emperors weren't safe. Hadrian, beloved by many, was mocked behind closed doors for his devotion to Antinous. When the youth drowned in the Nile, Hadrian wept publicly, built statues, founded a city in his name, deified him. To some, it was a beautiful love story. To others, it was disgraceful, a ruler who let his emotions soften him. Because in Rome, to love too openly was to surrender control. The bedroom revealed everything. Desires were dangerous. That's why wives like Livia learned to control not just their own image, but their husbands' bodies. She became the model of modesty, of pudicitia, never scandalous, always watchful. But behind her veil she moved pieces across a board few men even knew existed, spreading rumours, directing alliances, silencing threats. In her world, a shared bed could mean the rise or fall of dynasties. Rome understood this well, which is why sex was everywhere in public art but cloaked in silence in daily life, why statues embraced naked while living lovers looked over their shoulders, why a woman's smile at a dinner party might be read as seduction or betrayal, why every moan heard behind a curtain might echo in the Senate months later, because in Rome the sheets remembered, and sometimes they whispered louder than words ever could. The door opens. She doesn't flinch. She's been trained not to. She was 12 when she arrived. a birthday gift from a merchant to a senator's wife. Pale eyes, soft voice, healthy teeth, everything inspected, catalogued, assigned value. They renamed her Cassia, easier to pronounce. Now she lives in the cubicula, a wing of the villa reserved for private slaves. Not the ones who carry water or sweep floors. These are the others, the silent ones, the ones who serve by skin. Her duties are not written down. They're spoken quietly during grooming sessions, passed from older girls to new ones. Don't cry, don't resist, don't speak unless asked, and never show pain unless he wants it. Cassia does what she's told. Always. In ancient Rome, household slaves were not just labour. They were extensions of the master's body, tools with breath. Under Roman law, they had no right to refuse touch, no concept of consent. Their worth was measured by obedience, by beauty, by silence. Cassia is considered valuable, which means she suffers often. Her training was deliberate, not just in service, but in charm, voice modulation, eye contact. She was taught how to move, how to laugh at things that weren't funny, how to pleasure without appearing eager, unless eagerness was desired. Every aspect of her being was sculpted to match the fantasies of her owners. Some are used for evening entertainment. Others become concubines, assigned to one man like a shadow wife. Cassia is both. Marcus Cassius, her dominus, is one of the wealthiest men in Rome. He owns more than 500 slaves in his urban household. But he calls for Cassia often. His wife pretends not to notice. At banquets, Cassia plays the lyre. Afterwards, she is summoned privately. Her place in the household is secure, as long as she remains young, compliant, and beautiful. She has seen others sent away, too thin, too old, too vocal. She doesn't ask where they go. Roman law allowed masters to do as they pleased with their slaves. There were no protections, no age limits, no crimes of rape. A slave could not be violated legally, because she had no legal self. She was property. Touching her was like using a spoon, or breaking one. And yet, bonds formed. In stolen moments, Cassia and another girl, Lentula, shared quiet comforts, whispered stories, traced old scars, laughed when no one could hear. They were not lovers, they were not free, but they understood each other's silence. Until one day, Lentula disappeared. Cassia never asked why. This was Rome, a place where the line between pleasure and violence didn't exist for people like her, where intimacy meant performance, and comfort was as temporary as a smile, where some slaves were trained to speak Greek poetry, and others to endure pain without sound. Even love, when it bloomed, had no name, because love requires freedom. And freedom was a language Cassia was never taught. You hear them before you see them. Laughter, splashing, the slap of wet skin, the groan of weight benches, the low hiss of steam. You enter the Thermae, Rome's grand public bath complex, not as a bather, but as a ghost, watching, listening. Men move through marble halls wrapped in linen towels, their bodies oiled, scraped, and rubbed down by balneatores, attendants trained in massage and discretion. Some of these attendants are slaves, others are freedmen, a few are prostitutes in everything but name. Seneca the Younger once wrote in fury about the bathhouse beneath his apartment, the grunts of men lifting weights, the scream of a boy being plucked with tweezers, the slap of a palm against naked flesh, the murmur of men buying services not listed on any notice board. He wasn't outraged by sex itself, he was outraged by its volume. Baths in Rome were never just for cleanliness. They were social theatres, places where bodies, politics, and desire collided. Men bathed, women bathed, often separately, but not always. The palestra, the exercise yard, buzzed with flirtation. Deals were struck in the steam rooms, rendezvous arranged between massages. Everything appeared respectable. Nothing truly was. In quieter corners, you find doors that lead to smaller chambers, No signs, no questions, just a look, a gesture, a fee. The rules are understood but unspoken. Sex here is both transaction and ritual, not hidden, not condemned, not celebrated either. Just part of the structure, like columns or tiles. The baths were Rome's lungs. They breathed gossip, sweat, perfume, and secrets. On the walls of Pompei, those secrets remain. In the brothel district, the Lupanar, graffiti still speaks in vulgar poetry. Restituta, your hips dance sweeter than any lyre. Lucius paid 2 coins and left smiling. He came, he wept, she yawned. Each room in the brothel was a narrow cell, stone beds, faded frescoes, and prices scratched beside the door. The paintings weren't decorations, they were advertisements. They showed the acts, the choices, the power that could be borrowed, for a price. And above it all, the city watched. Senators walked these streets in cloaks, faces half hidden. Priests came at night. Even emperors descended into the darkness when impulse overwhelmed image. The Subura district, filled with taverns and rented rooms, pulsed with double lives. Respectable by day, animal by night. Rome never banned prostitution. It taxed it, registered it, managed it. Sex was part of the economy, the architecture, the calendar. What mattered wasn't the act, but who was doing it, and to whom. The baths, the brothels, the streets, they remember, not in marble, but in echoes, not in statues, but in scratches on the wall. Here, pleasure and power walked side by side, and shame was just another scent on the breeze. The drums begin at dusk, low, rhythmic, relentless. Their thud rises from the temple steps and spreads into the streets like a fever. Incense clouds the air, thick, sweet, suffocating. Men and women gather under the fading sky, heads swaying, eyes half-lidded. This is no quiet worship. This is surrender. At the centre, the galley begin to dance. They wear women's robes, bright silks, heavy jewellery, painted faces. But beneath the fabric, they were once men. Now, they belong to the goddess Cybele. Their bodies altered, their identities transformed, castrated in ceremony, bathed in blood, reborn as vessels of the divine. The crowd roars. This isn't metaphor. The ritual is real. Each spring, during the festival of Megalesia, new initiates take the blade. In a frenzy of music, wine, and holy madness, they cast off their manhood, literally, on the temple steps, before the public. Blood is offered to Cybele as a sign of ultimate devotion. The severed parts are buried beneath statues of the goddess. The initiate is carried away, wailing, reborn, and no one looks away. Rome absorbed many gods through conquest, Greek, Egyptian, Syrian. But Cybele was different, older, wilder. Her rites defied Roman order, Roman hierarchy. They upended gender, mocked control, dared to suggest that sexuality, when tied to divinity, answered to no man. The Galli were feared and ridiculed, but also respected. They could bless, they could curse. They performed sacred dances, oracles, and healings. They wandered the streets during festivals, collecting offerings, sometimes lifting their robes in mockery or revelation. They were neither men nor women. They were something else, something Rome couldn't categorize, and therefore couldn't fully contain. Sacred prostitution existed too. In the temples of Venus and Flora, women offered their bodies not for money, but for blessing. They slept with strangers as acts of piety, not commerce. The line between worship and lust blurred until it vanished. A woman might be mocked for infidelity at home, but praised for her fertility at the temple. Even married men participated, some under pressure, others willingly. Religious duty made the act clean, divine. In the cult of Bacchus, rituals took darker turns. Hidden in caves or secluded groves, followers drank wine until the world spun. Then, through dance and flesh and screams, they sought communion. Outsiders called it madness. The Senate tried to ban it. But they couldn't stop the hunger. Because Roman religion didn't ask for abstinence. It demanded participation. Sex wasn't separate from the sacred. It was central to it. To honour the gods meant honouring the body. To reach the divine sometimes meant destroying the self. And so the galley danced on bloodied feet, and women lit incense after lying with strangers, and priests blessed seeds with gestures learned in darkness. Rome called itself civilized, but its gods still craved flesh. You find it buried beneath a collapsed wall in Pompei, a thin lead tablet rolled tight scratched with crooked Latin. I bind Gaius Lucius so that he cannot eat, sleep, or find peace until he comes to me. It's a curse, a love spell, a desperate prayer written in the language of obsession. In Rome, desire wasn't just felt, it was manipulated, stolen, forced. People turned to magic when charm failed, when seduction fell short, when love turned cruel or one-sided. Beneath the marble and mosaics, Rome pulsed with invisible forces, curses, potions, whispered names buried in graves. These weren't childish superstitions. They were calculated acts of emotional warfare. Binding spells were common. They often called on chthonic gods, Pluto, Hecate, spirits of the restless dead. The petitioner would scratch the target's name onto soft lead, along with commands. Make him impotent, make her barren, make him burn for me and no one else. The tablet was then folded, pierced with nails and buried, often in a grave where the dead would carry the message. Sometimes hair or bits of clothing were tied into knots and buried with the spell. Sometimes blood was added, and always urgency. I cannot live unless he returns. Let her beauty rot if she leaves me. Let his wife miscarry until he comes back. This was love in Rome, drenched in fear, because to love without control was unbearable. Love potions were sold in taverns and marketplaces. Recipes varied. Some used herbs, fennel, myrrh, saffron. Others relied on filth, menstrual blood, crushed beetles, bone powder. Some included human ashes. They were mixed into wine, or spread onto lips, or dripped secretly into food. The line between potion and poison was perilously thin. A jealous wife might drug her husband to dull his desire for others. A young woman might try to bind a man's heart forever, only to stop his altogether. No laws protected against love magic, but if discovered, the accused could be beaten, enslaved, even executed. These acts were usually private, but the fear they caused was public. Men spoke of being charmed by slave girls. Women whispered about rivals who never aged, never failed to seduce. Physicians prescribed countermeasures, amethysts, crushed garlic, fasting. But none of them really worked, because the true power of magic wasn't in the ingredients, it was in desperation, in longing so fierce it bent reality. One Roman widow famously buried 13 curse tablets beneath her dead husband's tomb, each one addressed to a different lover who'd rejected her. Another woman carved her rival's name into a wax figurine and melted it nightly, whispering, "Shrink like this doll." Rome may have worshipped logic in its public forums, but in the shadows it bowed to the irrational, because love was dangerous, desire a disease, and magic the only cure that felt like hope. The tomb is quiet, not empty, never that, but still. A slab of marble rests at the centre, carved with the figures of a man and woman reclining side by side. Their hands meet lightly, hers atop his chest, his fingers curled beneath hers. Their faces are idealised, young, serene, untouched by pain. But the dates carved below tell the truth. He died at 47. She followed at 25. They were not buried in silence. Roman funerals, especially among the elite, were loud, theatrical and sensual. Perfume burned, musicians played, mourners wailed in rehearsed grief, hired women tore their garments and struck their breasts. But beneath the noise, the ritual followed precise structure, meant to comfort the dead and to show the living that nothing, not even death, would sever the bonds of family, marriage, or sex. Inscriptions were carved carefully. To my most chaste and obedient wife. To the husband who never strayed, not even in dream. To the mother of my sons, the flame of my hearth, my delight in bed and table. Epitaphs did not shy from intimacy. They boasted of it. Pleasure was not buried. It was preserved. Tombs weren't just markers. They were messages. Some were shockingly explicit. Frescoes discovered in suburban burial chambers show lovers intertwined. Some depict men with men. Others show women guiding the hands of their partners, gazes locked in what can only be described as remembered desire. These weren't fantasies. They were memories carved into stone, proof that pleasure mattered, even after the flesh had gone. Grave goods reinforced the point. Among coins and jewellery, archaeologists have uncovered objects clearly intended for personal use. Sensual oils, combs, carved figurines, rings meant to be worn only during intercourse. One woman was buried with a small bronze phallus in her hand. Scholars debate the meaning, a joke, a charm, or a final assertion of power over her own body. Perhaps all of the above, because in Roman belief, death was not a clean break. The dead remained nearby. They watched, they whispered, they visited in dreams. If not properly honoured, they could grow restless, so their needs had to be anticipated. That included desire. The Parentalia, a festival held in February, invited ancestors to feast. Families brought food, wine, and sometimes, though rarely spoken of, tokens of a more intimate nature. Because what you enjoyed in life, you might hunger for in death. Love, too, could transcend the grave. Pliny the Younger once described a friend whose wife died suddenly. He claimed she visited him nightly in dreams, calling his name, touching his face, begging him not to remarry. He never did. Some spirits were mourned as spouses, others were worshipped as gods. Antinous, Hadrian's beloved, drowned in the Nile and was immediately deified. Shrines rose, pilgrimages began. His image, forever youthful, became a symbol of eternal erotic beauty. Rome did not fear the sensual in death. It sanctified it, because to forget pleasure was to forget the soul itself. You're back where it began. The corridor is still bathed in gold, sunlight now, not lamplight. Dust floats like ash through the air. The frescoes are faded, the voices long gone. But something lingers, something that didn't burn, not with the fires of Vesuvius, not with time, not with empire. Now you understand what those whispers meant. You know why the slaves didn't flinch when the door opened, why the bride walked like she was being led to slaughter, why the wife powdered her face until it cracked like porcelain, why curses were buried beneath doorways, why temples smelled like blood and perfume. This wasn't decadence, it was structure. Rome built its greatness on control, of land, of bodies, of desire. You can still feel it in the stones. Those beauty rituals, they were poison masked as elegance. Those marriage contracts, livestock agreements dressed as tradition. Those bathhouses, theatres of seduction and transaction. Those funerals, erotic memorials to lives shaped and shattered by power. The Romans didn't separate the body from the state. They didn't believe in innocence, and they never, not once, pretended that sex was private. They regulated it, they taxed it, they weaponized it. Every touch was a transaction, every sigh had a price, every pleasure a hierarchy. And those who lived beneath it, the concubines, the boys, the painted wives, the child brides, were told that their pain was sacred, that their sacrifice maintained order, that suffering was part of their role in history. And perhaps that's what makes it so hard to look away, because the ash didn't just preserve rooms, it preserved roles, masks, systems, oaths carved into bone. They weren't monsters, they were human, terribly so. They loved, they grieved, They longed, and still they hurt each other in the name of beauty, of order, of piety. We haven't outgrown them, we just changed the language. We call exploitation opportunity. We call surveillance safety. We call coerced smiles empowerment. But if you listen closely, you'll hear the same whispers behind our walls. What they couldn't burn was the system. The one that teaches some people their bodies are currency, and others that love means possession. The one that still punishes women for wanting too much and for wanting too little. The one that teaches little boys to lead and little girls to serve. You stand in a ruin and think you're far from home, but look again. Their ghosts aren't resting. They're watching, whispering, not in Latin anymore, but in boardrooms, in classrooms, in bedrooms. And until we understand how deeply power shapes desire, we'll keep repeating them, their beauty rituals, their marriage laws, their quiet violence, because what the ashes preserved was us.